The seawall. This stone in the seawall is made from the moon. You could name its small dry craters after imaginary seas. Sometimes sun takes the imprint of a child's hand from the stone's dark side and extends it to me. I reach out. My finger fits, not the thumb. You would think stone steadies the hand. Paul Nash looked at the great slabs of Dymchurch seawall and painted a sea of tranquility again and again, so he could stop remembering the severed limbs that propped up his battlefield. Such moonshine. One day he origamied all his rage into a miniature seawall and sent it to Queen Mary to poison her doll's house. It hangs, let's say, on the drawing room wall, unattributed, unnamed. Hello, my name is David Kinloch, and this wonderful old sea wall helps to protect my home from the changeable moods of the North Sea. I love this wall because of its Janus-like character. It faces inwards in protection and outwards towards the mouth of the River Forth. Indeed, here we are neither river or sea, but somewhere in between. We are looking out at the Isle of May, which in the Middle Ages was an important place of pilgrimage. Successive Scottish kings came here regularly to say their prayers. But from here I can also see the great ships that transport the blades of windmills for the new wind farms they're constructing out at sea. We are poised here between past and future. And like my seawall, Greengown is a word that faces in different directions. Indeed, it can mean two almost diametrically opposed things. On the one hand, Greengown is sod, turf on a grave. On the other, it's the loss of virginity in open air. So sex and death, basically, and I guess much of my work has been about both, and sometimes both simultaneously. Here then is a short prose poem called Huzzyball, which was written way back in the 1980s in Paris, when being gay was still quite difficult, and when friends started to die from a mysterious disease. Huzzyball. Hushaba or Huzzyball, a lullaby from the verb to huzz, Scots. Pronounced with so strong a sibilation that it cannot properly be expressed in writing. Clips attached to the H and W enable you to fasten it around your head, as with all middle alphabet words. Select your preferred definition by pressing firmly on the hyphen. Impelled by the seesaw of its own intimate history, Huzzyball will balance between your eyebrows and take over. Mantelpiece clocks in the fragrant dinar light tick past you like lemons on an old fruit machine. Hushaba. Aluminium trolleys forward and reverse in the quiet green hospice. Huzzyball. The landscape steadies, and you see a young man lying with purple marks all over his thin body, a mother and sister kneeling, a man who is his lover poised, and a photographer crouched. We are all waiting. This is Huzzyball. And you wonder, surely the closed curtains swaying in the summer air will bring forth something. Ease, a scrap of melody, a brittle word that will not simply say the pain of this last lullaby, but be it, blinding us beyond the reach of the camera's ultimate pale cut. Greengown selects poems from over 30 years of work and sets them alongside more recent work that's collected here for the first time. So this next poem is from a different stage in my life when I was mapping aspects of Scottish history and art and researching the links between France and Scotland. But this same river is still present in this poem, and if you follow the camera lens to the right, eventually you come to the town of Leith, Edinburgh's port, where the Scottish calligrapher and portrait painter Esther Ingles died back in the early 17th century. Ingles isn't very well known, but during her lifetime she was celebrated by her contemporaries for her mastery of 40 different calligraphic scripts. Often she would paste little self-portraits into the frontispiece of hand-stitched booklets, as if to say, look, this is me, Esther. Esther Ingles. I may have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have a right to speak out too. My voice will be heard. She died in poverty in Leith in 1624. I dreamt that I was at my écritoire again. Dawn over Leith, and Leith nestling in the curling terminals, I give the letter C of Christ our Lord. And then I dreamt the tiny town spoke from the hand they call civilité, cried out to Esther, crouched with her crow-quill over bees and whirlpool motifs. I dreamt that little people, clinging to the roofs or snug in the crow's nest of a cresting ship, spied how my lines of lettera mancina undulate eternally from page to page. I saw the people balance dizzily and drown in a kaleidoscope of shapes. I dreamt they screamed that they were trapped in language and lonely, wrecked in a partial view. A few red tiles, a single sail, and then I felt my 40 different hands weigh down my body like knights of wilderness. I dreamt this flattened coastal town was all that I could get of life. Just several strokes of chancery beneath grotesques and river goddesses, and that my art was copied from the books of men. Well, the final poem I'd like to read from brings us back to the shores of Fife. It comes from the very end of the book, which is actually bookended by two pandemics, the experience of the AIDS pandemic of the 1980s and 90s, and then the more recent COVID pandemic. My collection contains some poems written in lockdown, and this one that I'm going to read is as hybrid as many that are in the collection, in that it mixes both verse and prose. It also tries to wed the distant past to much more recent experiences of loss and trauma. It's called A Winter's Tale, and the central character, Margaret, is both the great Queen Margaret of Scotland, medieval saint and founder of abbeys, and Margaret, who lives in a care home in Dunfermline. A Winter's Journey. Margaret is a queen, does not recall of where, or who, or what, or why. She sits and sits in Dunfermline toon, done up in insect paste of lac and kermis, crimson-lipped, crimson-faced, sipping from a cup of votive tea. At the bottom, left, there is the nurse, supplicant, her apron in flower of woad, her mouth an O of salad words. A scroll of knitting trails drop-stitched epiphany in silver banderoles across the miniature. Margaret is a queen, and this the blackroot gospel, dry as a bone from its soaking in a stream. Clasped in her bony hands, she presses it to remember why she must remember. Do this. The words just out of reach. She presses, and in a capital divided into stories, her book nods open. Nods open on Margaret as queen, even of this thumb Bible, miniature reflecting back to miniature, a tiny world of busy dusty foots, hawking badges of her shrine. There is her face again, smudged by night moth dust. A souvenir that can't recall itself, that blesses, remembers no one's sin. Margaret is queen of the hospitium's pressed flowers. No sticky notes or colour codes, no necklace of alarm, but ghosts of herbs and plants that sent her way through life. Lint in the bell and blue blowers from her childhood, dew cup, dents de lion, minuscule leaves of history so distant they barely make her story. Margaret is a queen in Dunfermline toon. She knits, she weeps. Dry-eyed she presses flowers between the quires of gospel pages, a black snow of words.